Signe Miranda here for the Creative Leaders. I'm interviewing T. Crane for artists, authors, and entrepreneurs. He's the managing partner at Three Source Enterprises, an international training company. Welcome, T.
Hey, Signe, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic. It's really great to have you on the interview show.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Thanks. And what I also wanted to mention is T is an artist and he's an entrepreneur and he's been in music and poetry. And I'd like to ask him about all of those things to share that information with you, the viewers. And what inspired you to get into music?
Ever since I was a little kid, I think probably I could blame my mom for that. She was very into culture and music and always exposed me to a broad variety of classical music and contemporary music. And I remember when I was a little kid, I listened to the radio incessantly, and I got so into music I could tell you what track in the album the art that song was from and where it was recorded. And like when I was like 9, I could do stuff like that. I was just so immersed in music. And I took up guitar when I was 9 years old, classical guitar, and started my first band when I was 10. And we played in my school, my elementary school. And
Cool.
so, yeah, pretty much my whole life.
And how long did you continue on music? Like you did it when you finished high school as well?
The first real serious band I got into was when I was in grade 9. Myself and some of my friends formed a band, learned a bunch of songs, and we played all of our junior high and the senior high school dances. And recorded a little bit, and it just progressed from there. So I was always involved in music, either playing it or listening to it or being a part of it. Through school and then after school as well. I was in the early punk rock scene, so I was fronting those kinds of bands. I got into jazz and all kinds of crazy musical projects and weird music that we made and all that stuff.
Awesome. And
Yeah.
how did you transition that into going into poetry?
Well, also I always wrote poetry and short stories. So when I moved out to Vancouver in the early 80s, there wasn't really much in the way of spoken word going on. In fact, it wasn't even called spoken word. So I just began doing these things in the punk scene because it was me laying out these words and it resonated really well with the audiences. And I began opening for bands. And in fact, it was an anomaly because as a poet, usually you're in front of a podium reading off the page. I was much more dynamic and physical, and I ended up opening for rock bands and touring and all that stuff as an opening act.
Awesome.
And so there's a group of us that were sort of the pioneers of the spoken word scene back then.
And where did you tour?
Toured all around the islands, and then some years later I actually toured with Lollapalooza as one of their performers doing spoken word. And so, yeah, I had videos on Much Music as well.
Cool.
Yeah.
And then you went into the production side of things, doing production management and tour management. How did you transition into that from being an artist?
Well, being an artist, it's hard to make a living. That's very viable. And I had learned how to be a theater stage manager when I was still in university. And so what I did when I came out to Vancouver was somebody said, hey, there's a jazz festival opening up. They're looking for stage managers. And they knew I had been a stage manager, so I went and began working with the Vancouver International Jazz Festival. And I ran the Commodore Ballroom for them for a number of years. And from that, I started working with other organizations, stage managing in music, and then I became a production manager, and then a technical director, and then I did some tour management as well. But it goes back to the early days in Calgary again. A friend of mine had a band doing the bar circuit.
Yeah.
And he needed a sound guy, and so I learned how to do sound and lights, just following these guys around and doing their sound and their lighting. And then I got into pyro after that, so I kind of had an all-around view of pyro, lighting, and audio and video. And that made me a good candidate to be a production manager. And it was actually, I remember when I made that decision to make that change, was I was working as a lighting technician on a fairly large show. I had just finished hauling a bunch of cable through the ceiling of this really old theater. And it was so dirty and so nasty up there. But I was the shorter guy, so they sent me up into the ceiling.
Yeah.
When I came out, I looked on the stage, and there was a guy standing there in clean jeans and a white shirt with a briefcase, and he was the production manager. And I went, you know what? I want that job. So I began working my way towards becoming a production manager.
Cool. And seeing the industry from both sides as an artist and also from the production side of things,
Yeah.
what did you learn from having that well-rounded view of the industry?
Well, it's an interesting industry. Like why I was in it for over 2 decades, and it was um, part of it was that I just loved being around music and art. And so it was my way of if I couldn't be on the stage, I wanted to be beside the stage or behind the stage. So that I always had my hand in the conveyance of culture and art. And what I learned was what's really important in life. Because I think in any industry, people lose context of what life is really all about. And I would see artists that would lose their minds over something being just a little bit out of place, and other artists that were very down to earth and accommodating, and some artists that didn't really care about the audience. They cared about how much money they made and how you treated them, and other artists that just loved the audience and really cared about the audience. And the difference between those that I really noticed was the ones that really loved their audiences, that really cared, put on the best shows. You felt such a strong connection with them, and you could feel their love and their passion. The other ones, it was pretty much all mechanical. They were technically really brilliant. They played it like the CD or the album, but the soul was kind of, obscured. So that really showed me that engage in things that engage your heart. And if you forget why you're doing it, take a break and remember why you do this and where you come from and who you really are, and use that as your vehicle of expression. So,
That's really great advice.
yeah, it is.
And who are some of your favorite artists to work with, or do you have any really interesting touring stories from some really fun experiences?
Well, um, yeah, there's a billion stories. We kind of have an unwritten code where we don't really talk about some of the crazy stuff that goes on. Just, because it's not really, you don't kiss and tell.
Yeah.
But some of the artists I worked with that I just were some of the most magical moments of my life were Maceo Parker is probably top of my list. That was James Brown's band leader. And when I first started working with Maceo, it was actually James Brown's band. He had just been sent to prison, and so his band was touring. And Maceo wrote most of the music for Mr. Brown. And it was a joy and a treat working for them. Really down to earth, wonderful guys, great music, and a lot of fun. But you had to be tight as well. They were very tight. So they knew their stuff like that. So you had to be on point. But again, it was very relaxed. When I was first introduced to Maceo, I said, "Nice to meet you, Mr. Parker." And we were standing outside his dressing room, and he looked at me and he pointed to the sign on his dressing room door which said Maceo. And he went, "Maceo. Maceo, let me hear you say it." I said, "Maceo." He goes, "That's what you call me, Maceo." I said, "All right, Maceo, nice to meet you." So that's how it started. It was a wonderful experience. They were very much like they treat each other like family, which was really cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, great group of people to work with.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And
crazy stories from the road. I can give you one where I won't mention any names, but I'll tell you an idea of sometimes what we had to go through.
okay.
Um, I was working at a venue, putting on a show, and there was a band coming from St. Louis, and very well-known R&B funk jazz band that was coming from St. Louis. The show had been sold out for months, and sound check time came, no band. So I called my producer to let him know, hey, they haven't shown up for sound check. Have you heard from them? He said, no, I haven't. So then we started calling around, and we discovered that they were stopped at the border because they had a less than transparent tour manager traveling with them who tried to sneak some items across the border. And so the Canadian officials seized their tour bus, all of their instruments, and stopped them for questioning. Now, we had this show that night.
Yeah.
So my boss started talking to the border officials. We had a good relationship with them and managed to convince them to release their personal instruments and the band, but they were going to hold on to the bus and everything else until they got to the bottom of this. And so when I got that word, we sent 3 vans down to the border with some cold drinks in it to grab them and bring them back to the venue. We had another local artist, a very well-known musician, who was opening for them, and he was also from St. Louis. So I managed to go out as he was playing in between songs and say, can you stretch it a little bit? He said, You just give me the signal when my time's done. We'll keep playing. So that was great. And then I found out that they were only bringing their personal hand instruments, so I had to go out and negotiate us using their drum kit and the other stuff that was on stage. So I went out and did that. We had to change the stage plot a little bit to accommodate the fact that we were supplying some backline for them and get that brought in. Meanwhile, the vans are driving from the border crossing up to the stage door. They arrive, and we still had 20 minutes left before it was supposed to be the turnover,
Yeah.
the space in between. So I thought, hey, this is great. So the band's coming up the stairs, one after the other. Their manager comes up, who I'd worked with before, and he was a very shady guy. But the lead singer, the feature guy of this band, wasn't there. I said, where's, I'll call him Dave. Well, I said, where's Dave? He goes, oh, he's still at the border trying to get our stuff out. I went, dude, we sold tickets for everybody to go see Dave. Not you, not these other people, Dave. Dave has to be here. I said, well, Dave, he wouldn't come unless he figured things out. So I'm like, oh my God. And then we got 20 minutes till turnover, mind you, right? So I call my boss again. He freaks out. He calls the border, gets Dave on the phone, and convinces him to come up. So we put him in a taxi cab. And back then, this was like early 90s, $87 US to come from the border to the backstage door in downtown Vancouver with this club.
Yeah.
So the band's on stage. They finish their set. We do the turnover. We get everything set up because I figured, well, we can get his band out there and at least get them start to rock, and then we'll bring him out after as soon as he arrives. The band walks out, just starts playing. He comes up the stage door. I hand him a clean shirt. He says hello because I've worked with him a bunch of times before. He changes his shirt, walks on stage 1 minute behind schedule.
Wow.
Yeah. So at that point, I went and I grabbed a beer. Just sat there drinking my beer. I aged like 10 years through that day. It was really insane. But nobody in the audience knew the difference. It ran actually on schedule the whole night.
Yeah.
But holy cow. But yeah, I just came in the door, handed him a shirt, changed shirts, walked out on stage, and boom. Then did a 90-minute show that was spectacular. And fired his tour manager as well. So
you've
right after
learned
the show, tour manager was fired.
so you've learned a lot about how to be calm and centered in
Yes.
challenging situations.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that is very helpful in the coaching and teaching you do. How did you transition into being a coach and a teacher?
Well, after like I'd spent all that time working in the entertainment industry, I hit a point where I couldn't reconcile it with myself anymore. The industry itself's got a downside and an upside. It can be kind of shady at times, and I just got tired of it. Also, it was a long time I'd been doing it. So I took a break. I'd been working for a resort organization running their show theater, and they were restructuring, and so I was laid off. It was my only corporate gig I ever had in my life, and it was perfect. I'd worked there for 5 years, and I got laid off, and I had to reassess what I wanted to do. And what came to me was to coach and teach. And so I began seeking out teachers and finding out about it and going into various trainings and did a lot of study and a lot of training. My favorite kind of teachers, I would seek them out and ask them if they would teach me, and most of them said yes. So I spent a significant amount of time studying, and then I launched my company doing coaching. And then from there, I began developing my own programs, and I transitioned into teaching and coaching and training, and then public speaking and so forth.
And you've recently launched a new company, Three Source Enterprises. Can you
Yes.
tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, Three Source Enterprises, we launched that last year. It's myself and two partners. And again, what we saw some deficiencies in the industry, the personal development industry, that we wanted to address. And those deficiencies had to go with quality control, a lot of greed, and a lot of non-delivery of promises and stuff, and we wanted to do it differently. We also noticed this phenomenon that's very common that we call the suntan effect. And in personal development, what the suntan effect is same as when you get a suntan. You're in the sun, you turn nice roasty color, and then you go home, and a couple of weeks later, you're back to your old self again. And we saw that in the personal development industry, that happened all the time. So we wanted to develop a model that built supportive communities so that the effect of your teaching and your training lasted and integrated for your whole life. And so we want people to really get it. We want them to live into their life the best they possibly can. And for the sake of us making less money than everybody else, we're more than happy to do that. It's really about getting people to the other side. So we focus on that specifically. And we design custom programs for that. We've got several programs that we've designed ourselves. And yeah, we launched in beta testing in North America back in July. And then we launched our company in Japan in December. And right now we're in negotiations to launch in a few other places around the world as well.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it is. It's really exciting.
And I've learned a lot from you. So I've brought you in as one of my mentors for the songwriters camp that I'm running this summer to help people get unstuck with their songwriting and unstuck in their life and connect with their creative selves. So I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the kinds of things that you'll be helping people with at the camp. Not getting into specifics, but just generally what they'll get out of it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, well, one of the things that I love is, as an artist myself and as a writer especially, we've all experienced writer's block, where for me, the way it shows up is I will write and everything looks like I'm 4 years old again. It's like no ideas are coming out clearly. It's really wooden language. It's got no flow. And it's some of the most frustrating experiences you can have because you know that you're capable of more, but it's just not happening. So how do you work through that and unplug that so that that juice comes back, that in touch, that flow comes back through you? And what I discovered was it's a series of techniques. So first of all, you don't stop creating. You keep creating no matter how nasty it is. And then the other part is really relaxing yourself and allowing yourself to be whatever you are in the moment. So it deals a lot with presence, being very present, being very forgiving of yourself. And I like to view everything with a sense of humor. So I incorporate humor into a lot of things because it really helps to laugh and find the ridiculousness in yourself, be the buffoon. Clowning and being a buffoon is a spectacular exercise for freeing yourself and letting go of being uptight because we get all clenched when we get uptight, right? So just like go ahead, be silly, be weird, let your freak flag fly, let yourself just engage whatever impulse you have. And when you start doing that in everyday life, when you start following that breadcrumb trail of impulse, your creative self really steps forward and starts to have all kinds of wacky ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So I have a background in theater improv and things like that, which are very useful. So, the laws of improv are always say yes and don't hesitate. And so I play the opposite sometimes where I'll get into an improv and I'll always say no and I will hesitate. Just because it's a foil to the to the other thing. But that's also my playful self too.
Awesome.
I'm a bit of a rebel.
So where can people find out more about you?
Well, right now, my website is under development, so it's not online yet. But it will be, and I'll let you know that later on for your viewers or whatever. But you can reach me on Facebook, T Crane, T Crane Coaching, whatever you want. Just locate me on Facebook. I'm very present on social media. And yeah, engage me. My mandate for my business is help anybody who asks. So if anybody has got a problem or they're feeling stuck, all they have to do is just reach out to me and I'll do whatever I can to give them some assistance.
Awesome. Thank you so much, T. It was wonderful interviewing you, and thanks for being on the show.
My pleasure, Signe. Thanks for asking me. This was really nice.
Have a great day.
You too. Bye.